Rose looked me up and down at her dining room table, glanced at the grease under one of my fingernails and said, "If you want to play father, John, start by proving you can afford one. Love does not pay rent, doctor bills, or diapers." Claire sat beside me with her eyes lowered and said nothing. Her father, Calvin, slid a yellow notepad across the table with numbers already written on it. $3,000 for prenatal bills, $1,800 for the first month of rent, $2,400 for furniture. Then Rose tapped the paper with her nail and smiled like she had already won. A discount mechanic does not get to make promises with empty pockets. They thought I was poor enough to sign anything. What they did not know was that I had spent the last 6 years letting people underestimate the wrong part of me. My name is John. At the time, I was 27, living outside Cincinnati, working days at an appliance repair shop and nights whenever emergency calls came in. I drove a dented gray pickup I had bought for $4,200 cash, wore the same 3 work shirts, and kept my real life so quiet that most people assumed there was nothing behind it. Claire knew the simple version of me. She knew the man who fixed washers, changed brake pads for friends, and brought grocery store flowers because he liked doing small things himself. She did not know about the trust my grandmother left behind. She did not know I owned 62% of a property portfolio valued at just under $4.8 million with 23 apartments, 2 storefronts, and 1 old repair bay, bringing in about $28,600 a month before expenses. Only my mother, Linda, and the attorney who managed the trust knew how much was in my name. I kept working because I hated what money did to people when they knew it was there. That silence became the first weapon they used against me. Claire and I had dated for almost a year before she ended it. No explosion, no cheating confession, no screaming in a parking lot. She just said she felt trapped, said she needed space, said I was kind but not enough for the life she imagined. I tried to accept it like a grown man, but for 5 weeks I checked my phone like it owed me an answer. So when her message came in on a Thursday afternoon, I read it 3 times before I breathed right. It said, "Can you come by tonight? I need to talk to you." I asked if it was about us. She sent back, "Kind of. Please just come." That one word did too much damage. Kind of. I drove to her parents' house after work with my shirt still smelling like machine oil and rain. Claire met me at the porch instead of letting me inside. Her face looked pale and she kept rubbing her thumb over the edge of a folded paper. When I asked what was wrong, she put the paper in my hand and said, "Just look." It was a pregnancy test from a clinic. Positive. For a second, the porch light, the street, her face, everything seemed to pull away from me. I asked, stupidly, "What is this?" Claire snapped, "You can read, John." Then her voice cracked and she said, "Congratulations. You're going to be a dad." I asked if she was sure it was mine, and the second the words left my mouth, her face changed. She looked at me like I had slapped her in front of the whole neighborhood. She said, "Is that really the first thing you want to ask me? What kind of woman do you think I am?" I should have held on to that question longer. Instead, I panicked and apologized. I told her I loved her. I told her I wanted to be there, that I would help with every appointment, every bill, every hard night. She cried then, but not the way someone cries from relief. It was tighter than that, like fear trying to pass for sadness. When I asked what she wanted to do, she said she had thought about ending the pregnancy for 1 bad hour and hated herself for it. I begged her not to make that choice out of fear. She touched my arm and said she probably would not, but she was young, scared, and not ready to be somebody's wife just because a test came back positive. Then she asked the question that made me feel like I still had a chance. "Would you really take responsibility, even if we don't get back together?" I said yes before she finished the sentence. That was the door they needed open. 2 days later, Claire told her parents. By Sunday, I was sitting at their table while Rose studied me like a loan application she already planned to deny. Calvin worked in commercial insurance and liked to speak slowly, as if every word cost more when it came from him. He asked what I made. I told him my repair job paid $22 an hour, more with emergency calls. I did not mention rental income. I did not mention the trust. I wanted to know who they were when they thought I had nothing. Rose gave me that answer fast. She asked if I had health insurance good enough for a baby. She asked if I had savings. She asked whether my mother was going to pay for everything because Men like you usually call help responsibility." Claire whispered, "Mum, stop." But she did not look at me when she said it. Then Calvin slid that notepad over, the one with $7,200 in immediate costs already circled. I told them I would cover what needed to be covered. Rose laughed once, small and dry. "You couldn't even bring my daughter real flowers when you dated her. Now you want to bring a child into the world?" I did not defend the flowers. I remembered every $14 bouquet Claire had smiled over in my truck, and I watched her pretend the memory was not sitting there with us. That was when Dylan walked in through the back door without knocking. I had seen him around before. He lived across from my mother's street and ran a small auto detailing shop in an old brick building near the river. He was the type who wore clean boots to look like he worked harder than he did. He greeted Rose with a kiss on the cheek, nodded at Calvin, then looked at me and said, "This the guy." Claire went still. Rose said, "This is John." Dylan smiled and held out his hand with too much confidence. "Heard a lot." I shook his hand. He squeezed harder than necessary. Then he looked at my work shirt and said, "Man, Claire always had a soft spot for projects." Nobody corrected him. That sentence stayed in the room even after he walked out to help Calvin with something in the garage. I looked at Claire, waiting for anger, embarrassment, anything. She only wiped under one eye and told me her family was stressed. I wanted to believe that because the alternative made my chest feel too small. A week later, Claire asked if I was serious about us living together. I said I was. I thought we would start at my place or stay with my mother for a month while we found something reasonable. Claire rejected both before I finished. She said, "I'm not moving into your mum's house, John. I need my own place. If we do this, we do it like adults." Adults meant I paid $1,450 a month for a two-bedroom apartment near her parents, plus a $1,250 deposit and $300 in application fees. It was not one of my buildings. I did that on purpose. I wanted a clean line between the life she thought I had and the one I had protected. Rose called the apartment acceptable for now, which meant she hated that it was not something she could brag about. I spent another $2,170 in the first month on a crib, a used rocking chair, a changing table, kitchen stuff, and a stroller. Claire picked because she said cheaper ones looked unsafe. When I hesitated at the $640 price tag, Rose, who had come with us, said loudly in the store, "This is what babies cost. If numbers scare you, maybe you should have thought before acting like a man." 3 people in the aisle turned around. Claire stared at a row of pacifiers like she had not heard it. I paid, carried the boxes to my truck, and said nothing. Silence had kept my real life safe for years, but with Claire's family, it started to look like permission. Still, there were moments that made me stay. At the first ultrasound, Claire grabbed my hand when the sound came through the little speaker. The room was dim, the nurse was smiling, and there was this fast, tiny heartbeat filling the space between us. Claire looked at me then, really looked, and whispered, "That's our baby." I had never wanted anything the way I wanted that sentence to be true. That night, we ate takeout on the apartment floor because the table had not arrived yet. She leaned against my shoulder and talked about names. If it was a boy she liked Noah, I liked it too. She smiled for the first time in days and said, "Noah John sounds sweet." I almost told her then about the trust, about the properties, about the account with $184,000 sitting untouched for capital repairs and emergencies. I wanted to say she did not have to be scared. Then her phone lit up on the floor. She flipped it over too fast. I saw only one letter before the screen went dark. I asked who it was. She said it was a reminder from the clinic app, but her voice did the same small break it had done on the porch. I let it go because I wanted peace more than I wanted proof. That was one of my worst habits back then. I called it trust when it was really fear of what a question might cost. The next month should have been easier. It got stranger. Claire wanted to visit her parents every Sunday, but every time I invited her to my mother's house, she found a reason not to go. She was nauseous. She was tired. She did not feel comfortable. She said my mother looked at her too closely, even though Linda had only met her twice and had been polite both times. When I asked if something had happened between them, Claire said, "No, John, can you please not make everything a problem?" The problem was already there. I was just late naming it. My mother noticed too. Linda was not dramatic. She had worked hospital billing for 28 years, raised me mostly alone, and could smell a bad explanation from across a parking lot. One Saturday when I stopped by without Claire, she asked why Claire never came inside anymore. I said pregnancy was hard on her. My mother looked out the front window toward the house across the street, where Dylan's black truck sat in the driveway, and said, "Does she know he lives there?" I asked who. Linda did not answer right away. She just folded a dish towel and said, "Dylan, the one who used to come around when you two were broken up." The room got quiet in a way I did not like. I asked what she meant by used to come around. My mother said she had seen Claire twice on that street after the breakup, once getting out of Dylan's truck near the gas station, and once standing by his porch at almost midnight. She said she had not told me because Claire and I were not together then, and she did not want to hurt me over something that might have been nothing. I tried to make it nothing. Claire had been single. She had the right to talk to whoever she wanted. But the baby math pressed against my ribs. 5 weeks broken up. Positive test. Her panic. Dylan walking into Rose's kitchen like family. That night, Claire asked why I was quiet. I told her my mother had mentioned Dylan. Her face changed before she got control of it. She said, "Your mother needs a hobby." I asked if she had seen Dylan while we were apart. She threw a folded baby blanket into a drawer and said, "I am not going to be interrogated by a man who is supposed to be supporting me." Then she cried, and somehow I became the one apologizing again. By the time Noah was born, I had learned how easy it was for a guilty person to make your question look like cruelty. The delivery happened on a cold Monday morning in January. I drove Claire to the hospital at 4:18 a.m. while she gripped the door handle and cursed at every pothole. Rose and Calvin arrived 40 minutes later with coffee for themselves and nothing for me. Rose told the nurse I was the boyfriend, not the father, then smiled at me like it had been an accident. When Noah finally came, none of that mattered for about 10 minutes. He was small, red, furious, and perfect. The nurse placed him near Claire, and I saw her face soften in a way that almost erased every ugly thing that had happened. She let me touch his tiny foot. I whispered his name, and he stopped crying for half a second. I was gone after that, completely gone. Then paperwork entered the room. A hospital administrator came by with forms, including the voluntary acknowledgement of paternity. Rose reached for the clipboard before I did and said, "He'll sign." The administrator looked at Claire, then at me, and explained that I should read everything carefully. Rose laughed and said, "There is nothing to read. He already said he wanted responsibility. I had signed contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars through my attorney, but that clipboard made my hands sweat. Not because I did not want Noah, because Rose was watching me too closely. I asked if we could wait until Claire was more rested. Rose's smile disappeared. Calvin said, "A real father does not need a nap to claim his child." Claire closed her eyes and whispered, "Please don't start today." So I signed. Dylan came by that evening with a blue stuffed elephant and a gift bag from an expensive baby boutique. Rose acted surprised, but not surprised enough. Dylan stepped beside Claire's bed and said, "There he is, little man." Not what a neighbor says. Not like that. I watched Claire's fingers tighten around the blanket. Dylan looked at me, then at the bassinet and said, "Crazy how life works out, huh?" I asked what he meant. He shrugged and said, "Just saying. Some guys get lucky." Rose told him not to tease. She said it with a smile. My mother came the next day. She brought a $36 pack of diapers, homemade soup, and the kind of quiet that made other people nervous. She looked at Noah for a long time. Too long. Then she touched his cheek, stepped back, and asked if she could speak to me in the hallway. I thought she was emotional. I thought she was going to say she was proud of me. Instead, she looked me straight in the face and said, "John, that baby is not yours." I actually laughed because the sentence was too ugly to stand upright. I told her not to ever say that again. She said, "I know what I saw with Claire and Dylan. I know dates, I know faces, and I know when a room is pretending not to know something." I told her she was wrong. She said, "Maybe. Then prove me wrong before they make it impossible to step back." I walked away from her shaking with anger. In the room, Claire was asleep. Noah was making tiny sounds in the bassinet, and Rose was sitting in the corner texting. She looked up when I entered and asked, "Everything okay with Mommy?" Mommy, not Linda. Mommy, like she was reminding me I was still a boy in her house. I said everything was fine. It was not fine. After Claire came home, the apartment changed. There were bottles near the sink, burp cloths on the couch, and hospital bracelets in a drawer. Noah slept in short, cruel pieces, and I learned how to warm formula with one hand while answering repair calls with the other. I paid the $1,450 rent, the $286 electric bill, the $417 insurance adjustment, and $1,260 for the first round of medical charges not covered by Claire's plan. Rose still called me cheap because I bought generic wipes. 2 weeks after the birth, she came over while I was assembling a white dresser. Dylan was with her, carrying a box of baby clothes. I asked why he was there. Rose said, "He was kind enough to help. Some people don't have to be asked twice." Dylan looked around the apartment and said, "Not bad. Kind of small, but not bad." Then he glanced at the dresser pieces on the floor and added, "You need help with that, or do you fix only machines?" Claire told him to stop, but she said it softly, almost like she was afraid he would listen. When they left, I found a receipt in the trash from the baby boutique. $312. The buyer name was Dylan. The purchase date was 2 weeks before Noah was born. That did not prove anything. It proved enough to keep me awake. I ordered a home DNA kit the next morning for $149. I hated myself when it arrived. I hid the box behind cleaning supplies under the sink and told myself I would throw it away. Then Rose called me during lunch and said Claire needed $800 for baby cushion money because a responsible man kept cash available. I said I had already paid the medical bill that week. Rose went quiet, then said, "John, poor men always count what they have done. Fathers ask what still needs doing." That sentence made my decision for me. I swabbed my cheek after midnight. Then I stood by Noah's bassinet for almost 20 minutes before I swabbed his. His little mouth opened in his sleep, trusting everybody. I almost stopped. I almost decided that loving him was enough to make the truth unnecessary. Then Claire's phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen showed one text before it went dark. It was from Dylan. Did he sign everything? My hands went cold. I mailed the kit before work and spent the next 4 days living in two realities. In one, I was a tired new father trying to hold a family together. In the other, I was a man walking around with a question sharp enough to cut through every room he entered. Claire noticed. She asked if I was mad about money. I said no. She asked if my mother had been talking again. I said nothing. That was the first time Claire looked scared of my silence. On Friday, an email from the lab hit my inbox at 6:42 p.m. I was in the parking lot outside a laundromat I owned through the trust, though nobody there knew it. A tenant had called about a dryer vent and I had gone myself because working with my hands kept me from checking my phone every 30 seconds. The result opened as a PDF. Probability of paternity, 0%. I read it once, then again. Then I zoomed in because my brain tried to reject the shape of the number. 0 looked too clean for what it did to me. It did not leave room for misunderstanding. It did not leave room for hope. It turned my son into someone else's child in one line. I sat in my truck until the laundromat lights clicked on by timer. Then my property manager, Marcia, called. She did not know anything about Claire, Noah, or the test. She only knew business. She said Dylan had come by the office angry about the repair bay lease on River Street. He was behind $18,400, including late fees, and wanted an extension before the trust board reviewed non-renewals. Then she said something that made me stop breathing right. "He claimed he had family leverage with you," she said. "Do you know what he means by that?" I did not answer. She kept talking. Dylan's repair bay was one of mine. The old brick building where he ran his detailing shop, the one he bragged about like he owned it, belonged to Westgate Trust. His lease renewal, his debt, and the $72,000 expansion loan he wanted to secure through that property all needed my approval. He had been laughing in my apartment while standing on my floor. I drove home with the DNA result printed at a FedEx for 182, folded inside my jacket like it might burn through the fabric. I expected to find Claire alone. Instead, Rose's car was in the lot, Calvin's SUV was beside it, and Dylan's black truck was parked at the far end, lights off. Nobody had told me they were coming. When I opened the apartment door, the first thing I saw was the hospital folder on the kitchen table. The second thing I saw was a stack of papers beside it. Rose stood over them with a pen in her hand. Claire was holding Noah near the window, crying quietly. Dylan leaned against my counter like he paid rent there. Rose looked at me and said, "Good, we need to settle a few things tonight." I felt the folded DNA result inside my jacket. Then I saw the top page on the stack. It was not a baby form. It was a petition asking me to accept temporary child support at $2,100 a month while giving Claire full residential custody. And clipped behind it was a lease transfer request for Dylan's repair bay. For a moment, I just stood in the doorway with my keys still in my hand, looking at those papers spread across the kitchen table like my life had become something people could divide before dinner. Rose had arranged everything neatly: the support petition, the custody language, the note about me continuing rent until Claire found stability. And underneath all of it, almost hidden but not hidden well enough, was the lease transfer request for Dylan's shop. That was when I understood the shape of the room. They were not just scared, they were organized. Rose smiled like she had practiced in the car. She said this did not need to become ugly, that Claire was exhausted, that Noah needed peace, and that a real man would sign what protected the child. Calvin stood by the sink. Dylan stayed near my counter, but his eyes kept dropping to the papers. Claire would not look at me. I put my keys on the table slowly and asked why Dylan was there. Rose answered before anyone else could. She said Dylan cared about the baby, that he had been supportive, and that this was not the time for jealousy. The word jealousy almost made me laugh. I had a DNA result in my jacket, his text on Claire's phone in my head, and his unpaid lease sitting behind a child support petition. I said, "Then let's talk about why he cares so much." Claire whispered my name like a warning. Dylan pushed off the counter and said I was emotional, that new fathers sometimes got overwhelmed, that I should sit down before I embarrassed myself. He said it in my apartment, 5 feet from the crib I had paid $580 for, beside the woman who had let me sign a hospital form for a baby that was not mine. Something in me went quiet. Rose tapped the papers and said, "We already know you cannot fight this. You signed the acknowledgement. You are legally the father unless a court says otherwise, and courts care about what is best for the child." She looked proud of that sentence, like she had paid someone $300 to teach it to her. Maybe she had. The wording was too clean for a woman who usually preferred insults. I asked if Claire knew about the support number. She finally looked up. Her face was pale, and Noah was sleeping against her chest. She said, "My mum said it was just temporary." Temporary. $2,100 a month, full custody, continuing the $1,150 rent, plus half of uncovered medical expenses, all while Dylan stood by my counter, waiting for his lease transfer to slide through the same night. I pulled the DNA result from my jacket and placed it on the table. Nobody moved at first. Then Rose reached for it. I covered the page with my hand and said, "No." Claire reads it first. Claire adjusted Noah against her shoulder, stepped closer, and looked down. I watched her eyes find the line. Probability of paternity, 0%. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She shook her head once, not like she disagreed, but like something inside her had finally lost the strength to pretend. Dylan said, "Those home kits are garbage." That was his first mistake. I told him it was strange he knew what kind of test it was before Claire said anything. His jaw tightened. Rose jumped in and said any cheap internet test could be contaminated, and that I had probably done it wrong because I was desperate to avoid responsibility. She said, "You wanted the baby until the bill arrived." That was the sentence that nearly broke me, not because it was true, because Noah stirred when she said it, and for 1 second I remembered the first night he came home, how I had walked the hallway with him against my chest until sunrise, whispering that I had him, that he was safe, that no paper could change love. A paper had changed the room anyway. I told Claire we would do a court-admissible test the next morning. I said I would pay the $620 fee myself, Dylan laughed under his breath and said, "Man, you really are trying to return the kid like a bad part." I took one step toward him before Calvin blocked me with a hand on my chest. Calvin said I needed to control myself. Rose said this was exactly why Claire needed protection. Claire started crying harder, and Dylan used that moment to act noble. He told me I was scaring her. The whole room tried to make my reaction bigger than what they had done, so I made myself smaller. I sat down at the table and picked up the lease transfer request. Dylan's face changed before he could stop it. It was only half a second, but I saw it. Rose saw it too, and moved like she wanted to take the paper from me. The request said he wanted to transfer the lease on 414 River Street from Denton Auto Detail to Dad Holdings. The monthly rent was $3,800, with a proposed reduced rate of $2,600 for 12 months. In the margin, someone had written, "Ask John to sign witness page only." I looked at Dylan and asked, "Why is my name anywhere near your lease?" He said it was just paperwork Calvin had printed by mistake. Calvin cleared his throat too fast and said the documents had gotten mixed up at his office. But the answer came too quickly and the room shifted around it. Claire looked confused now, not guilty. That mattered. Maybe not enough to save us, but enough to change what I believed she knew. I folded the lease request and put it in my pocket. Rose snapped, "That is not yours." I said, "Neither is my signature." No one spoke for 3 full seconds. Then I told them to leave. Rose refused at first. She said Claire and Noah were staying there tonight and that I could go sleep in my truck if I needed space. I looked at Claire and asked what she wanted. Her lips trembled. She said she wanted to go to her parents' house until the second test. I nodded because fighting over her in that moment would have made me look exactly like the man Rose needed me to be. But before Claire walked out, I asked if she had known Dylan might be Noah's father when I signed the hospital form. She looked destroyed by the question. She said, "I thought he couldn't be." Then she looked at Dylan, and something hard passed through her face. "He told me he couldn't be." That was the first real crack. Dylan said, "Do not put this on me." Claire stared at him and said, "You told me you had the surgery." Rose grabbed her arm and told her not to discuss private things in front of me, which was a strange thing to say about the private thing that had ruined my life. I did not chase them into the parking lot. I watched Rose carry the folder, Calvin carry the diaper bag, Claire carry Noah, and Dylan carry nothing but the expression of a man calculating how much I knew. When the door closed, the apartment sounded bigger than it had ever sounded with a baby inside it. I did not sleep. By 6:10 the next morning, I was in my attorney's office downtown. His name was Martin Hale, and he had handled the Westgate Trust since my grandmother died. I handed him the DNA result, the lease request, a screenshot I had taken of Dylan's text from Claire's phone, and every receipt I had paid since the pregnancy started. The receipts totaled $18,1072. That did not include rent. Martin read the lease request twice, then leaned back and said, "Why does Dylan Denton think you can influence a Westgate lease?" I said, "Because I think Calvin found out." Martin's face changed a little. Calvin worked insurance. He had access to property records, business filings, policy ownership, and enough professional gossip to connect names if he got curious. Westgate Trust was not secret, but it was quiet. My name did not appear on every public document, but it appeared on enough if someone knew where to look. The worst part was not that they had learned I had money. The worst part was that they had still treated me like trash until they needed it. Martin made 3 calls in front of me. He scheduled a legal paternity test for 9:30 that morning, told Marcia, my property manager, not to approve or modify any lease connected to Dylan Denton, and contacted a family law attorney named Rebecca Sloan, whose consultation alone was $450 an hour. Rebecca told me not to sign anything. She told me not to argue by text. She also told me that because I had signed the acknowledgement at the hospital, I needed to move quickly before support orders hardened around the child's best interest. Time had become another thing they tried to use against me. The lab test happened that same morning. Claire came with Rose and Dylan. I came with Martin, which erased Rose's smile the second she saw him. The nurse swabbed me. She swabbed Noah. Claire signed the consent form with shaking fingers. When Dylan was asked whether he would voluntarily provide a sample too, he said no. Claire turned toward him slowly. She said, "Why not?" He said he did not have to prove anything. That was his second mistake. Rebecca filed the emergency petition that afternoon, not to punish Claire, not to rip Noah from anybody, to establish the truth before Rose turned a lie into a monthly payment plan. The filing cost me $2,750 before sunset. By then, I had also paid $625 for the lab and $118 to get certified copies of every hospital and apartment document they had pushed in front of me. The official result came back 4 days later. Same answer, 0%. The report used cleaner language than heartbreak deserved, but the meaning was brutal. I was excluded as Noah's biological father. Claire called me after she read it. I let it ring twice before answering because I was afraid of how much I still wanted her voice. She cried so hard I could barely understand her. She said she was sorry. She said Dylan had sworn he had a vasectomy after an injury years earlier, that he had told her there was no chance, that the one time after our breakup had been stupid and humiliating, and something she buried because she thought it could not matter. I wanted to hate her cleanly. She made that impossible. She had lied by omission. She had let me sign. She had let me buy cribs, pay bills, hold that baby, dream out loud. But I heard something in her voice that did not sound like a performance anymore. It sounded like a woman realizing the person she trusted had used her fear, then watched another man build a life on top of it. I asked why Dylan had been around the hospital. She said Rose had called him after Noah was born because she thought he deserved to know eventually. That meant Rose had known there was a possibility, maybe not certainty. Enough. The next hearing was set for Thursday. Rose wore pearls to the courthouse and whispered loudly enough for 3 benches to hear. Some women raise sons to run from responsibility. My mother sat beside me, calm as stone, and said, "And some women raise daughters to be shields for men who owe rent." Rose's face hardened. Rebecca presented the 2 DNA results, the hospital acknowledgement, the timeline, and the petition they had tried to push in my apartment. Then Dylan's name came up. His attorney argued that his biological involvement was unproven because he had not tested. Rebecca asked the judge to order testing. Dylan shifted in his chair. Claire looked at him like she had never seen him before. The judge ordered him to submit a sample within 48 hours. Dylan objected. The judge repeated the order. That was the first visible consequence, small but satisfying. A man who had laughed in my kitchen now had to prove what he had been trying to hide. But the real reversal did not happen in court. It happened 2 days later. In a conference room above the repair bay, Dylan thought he could steal. Marcia had called a tenant compliance meeting because Dylan was behind $8,400, had altered plumbing without permission, and had tried to submit a fraudulent lease transfer request using language that implied my personal consent. Martin told me I did not have to attend. I told him I wanted to. Dylan walked into that conference room with Calvin beside him. That told me enough. Calvin did not see me at first. He was busy telling Marcia that Denton Auto Detail was a valuable tenant, that the rent reduction from $3,800 to $2,600 would help preserve a local business, and that a lease transfer to DAD Holdings would protect everyone. He said, "The beneficial owner is willing to cooperate. We have a personal relationship with him." Then I stepped in. Calvin stopped mid-sentence. Dylan looked like somebody had pulled all the air out of his blazer. Marcia stood and said, "Mr. Walker, do you want to take the chair at the head of the table?" I had never cared about chairs until that one. Dylan stared at me. Calvin's mouth opened, then closed. I sat down slowly, placed the folder in front of me and said, "Let's discuss my property." The silence after that sentence was worth every insult they had ever thrown at me. I told Dylan that Westgate Trust owned 414 River Street, appraised at $920,000. His company owed $18,400 in rent and fees, plus $11,600 for unauthorized plumbing and electrical changes. The lease transfer was denied. The reduced rent request was denied. The expansion consent for the $72,000 loan was denied. And his renewal option was suspended pending review. Dylan tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. He said, "You fix washing machines." I said, "And I own the building where you fix your reputation." Marcia looked down at her notes. Martin did not smile. Calvin went grey. Dylan said I was doing this because of Claire. I told him no. I was doing it because he was delinquent, because he altered the property without approval, and because he tried to use a baby and a fake family connection to influence a commercial lease. Those were not feelings. Those were violations. Then Martin slid a copy of Dylan's text across the table. Did he sign everything? Under it, he placed the lease request with my name referenced as witness. Calvin said, "This is being taken out of context." I turned to him and asked whether Rose knew I owned the building when she shoved child support papers in front of me. He did not answer. That was an answer. He tried to threaten me with reputation. He said I should think carefully before making enemies in town because people respected his family. I looked at the man who had priced my worth on a yellow notepad and told him his insurance firm might be interested in why he was involved in a tenant's fraudulent lease submission connected to a family paternity dispute. He sat back like I had touched a nerve. By the end of that meeting, Dylan had 30 days to cure $30,000 in combined rent, late fees, and property damage deposits, or vacate. No rent reduction, no transfer, no loan consent, no handshake, no hidden rescue from the mechanic he thought was broke. When he stood up, he said, "You think money makes you a man?" I said, "No, but it shows me who was pretending to be one." He left before Calvin did. The DNA result naming Dylan as Noah's biological father came back the next week. 99.99998%. Claire sent me a photo of the report, then called and said nothing for almost a full minute. I could hear Noah fussing in the background, and that sound did something cruel to me because my body still reacted like I needed to help. I asked if she was safe. She said yes. Then she told me Rose had exploded when the result came in, not at Dylan, but at her. Rose had called her careless, stupid, humiliating. Calvin had not said much. Dylan had already stopped answering her calls. That was how men like him loved. Loud when it cost nothing, gone when the bill arrived. The court corrected paternity. My acknowledgement was rescinded. I was released from future child support. The judge ordered Dylan to reimburse $6,400 in testing and legal costs and directed him into temporary support while the full order was calculated. The number came back later at $1,875 per month, plus 64% of unreimbursed medical expenses. Rose did not look at me when the judge read it. She looked at Dylan. That was punishment too. Claire tried to speak to me outside the courtroom. She said, "I never wanted to hurt you like this." I believed that. I also knew it did not undo anything. I told her the worst part was not that Noah was not mine. The worst part was that she let me become his father, while there was still a question she was afraid to ask. She cried and said Dylan had convinced her the question was impossible. I told her impossible things still need honesty when another person is about to build a life around them. She asked if I hated her. I looked at Noah asleep in the carrier, his tiny hand curled near his face, and I felt the answer split inside me. I hated what she had done. I hated what Rose had done. I hated Dylan so sharply it almost felt clean. But Claire was the person standing in front of me with the wreckage in her arms, and hate would have been easier than grief. I told her, "No, but I cannot be your shelter anymore." A month later, Dylan's shop closed. He did not cure the $30,000. He tried to blame me online, posted that a rich coward landlord had targeted a small business because of personal drama. He did not use my name because Martin sent a defamation warning within 2 hours, along with photographs of the unauthorized work, the unpaid ledger, and the signed lease clauses. The post disappeared that night. His equipment was moved out on a rainy Friday. I watched from my truck across the street, not because I needed to gloat, but because some part of me needed to see the end of the thing that had stood across from my mother's house like a secret with windows. Dylan loaded polishers, vacuums, and 2 dented tool chests into a rented box truck. He looked smaller without the building behind him. Claire moved into a smaller apartment with help from her aunt. Dylan paid late twice in the first 3 months. The court garnished his account after the second missed payment. Noah had his last name changed before summer. And me? I stayed in the apartment until the lease ended because I could not bring myself to abandon it overnight. The crib stayed assembled for 3 weeks after Claire took Noah's things. I would come home from work, see it in the corner, and feel my chest tighten like the room had forgotten to stop expecting him. One Saturday, my mother came over, picked up the blue elephant Dylan had brought to the hospital and said, "This goes." I said I did not care. She said, "That is why it goes." We packed the crib, the clothes, the unopened diapers, and the little white dresser I had assembled while Dylan laughed at me. I donated most of it to a women's shelter. It was not enough, but it was better than letting grief gather dust. 2 months after the final order, Claire asked me to meet her at a park. I almost said no. Then she said Noah had started smiling at ceiling fans, and she did not know why she was telling me that, except that I was there for the beginning. I met her. Noah was in a stroller under a maple tree, bigger than I expected, and still familiar in a way that hurt. Claire looked different, less protected. She said therapy had made her understand that fear was not an excuse for using me as safety. Then she said, "You were stable because you were good, not because you were stupid. I'm sorry I let them treat you like you were." That apology did not fix my life, but it landed somewhere real. She asked if I wanted to hold Noah. I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to. But I knew if I picked him up, some part of me would start bargaining with pain again, trying to turn love into a legal right. I touched his little hand instead. He wrapped his fingers around mine with that unfair baby strength, and for a few seconds, I let myself love him without claiming him. Then I let go. By fall, the River Street building had a new tenant, a family-owned HVAC company paying $4,250 a month on a 3-year lease with a $12,000 security deposit. The old detailing sign came down, and the brick was pressure washed until the whole front looked younger. For the first time in months, I looked at that building and did not see Dylan. I saw something I had almost forgotten. Mine. Not because of money, because I had stopped letting people use my silence as a place to hide their lies. I still fix appliances. People still underestimate me when I show up in a work shirt with a toolbox. Sometimes they speak slowly to me. Sometimes they ask if the owner is coming. Sometimes they look at my truck and decide they already know the size of my life. I let them. A person who needs strangers to see his worth is still renting space in their eyes, but I do not confuse humility with hiding anymore. Rose saw me once at a grocery store almost a year later. She was holding a bag of oranges, and when she recognized me, her face folded. Not into apology, into awareness. She knew I was not the poor mechanic she had mocked. She knew I had seen every ugly inch of her, and she knew there was nothing left to take from me. She started to say my name. I walked past her without stopping, not because I was weak, not because I was angry, because the strongest thing I had left was the right to deny her another scene. Outside, my old grey pickup was parked between a Lexus and a Mercedes. For once, it did not look small to me, it looked honest. I got in, turned the key, and sat there with my hands on the wheel. I thought about the porch, the hospital room, the kitchen table, and the conference room where Dylan finally learned whose building he had been standing in. They thought they were trapping a broke man with a baby. They did not know the broke man owned the walls around them. And by the time they found out, the only thing I still wanted was my name back. What would you do in this situation? Be honest, or did this remind you of someone? Tell me in the comments. And if this made you think about your own relationship, I left something in the description that can help you build something stronger. Subscribe if you want more stories like this every day, and share this with someone who needs to hear this story.